Joel Klatt, the voice of college football, is joining us on a Wednesday, as he regularly does. So,
What's
you
up,
know
dude?
what? You know,
How are you?
I used to be afraid when I was younger of flying, so I bungee jumped. And I went to the Space Needle, and I attacked my fear. And in college football, here's my fear with Texas, and it was realized. They're glamorous, they're beautiful, they're hip, they're cool, and they're going to get bullied in a game where they have better players. And I watched that thing, and I went, this is my fear of flying. I attacked that. I do think eventually this loss could help them. But wasn't that our worst fear of Texas?
Well, of course, and that Georgia owned them at the line of scrimmage.
Yes.
Yeah, and even that really experienced and quality offensive line that I've been raving about all year.
Yeah.
They got handled. Handled. And you got to give Georgia's defense a lot of credit. Now, the one thing that I do think is overlooked in that loss is that Texas's defense actually played really well.
Yeah.
Really well. They got some turnovers. And, if it wasn't for the fact that Georgia had so many short fields in order to gain that lead. I mean, they got up 23-0 and didn't really do anything offensively. They got the ball at the 13, at the 8, the 26 of Texas, so they weren't sustaining drives. In fact, Georgia only sustained one drive. That's not a knock against Georgia. I'm not here telling you that, like, it was lucky that Georgia won. Georgia was the better team. They were the better team at the line of scrimmage, more specifically. And they were also much more comfortable being uncomfortable. You could tell that one team had been on that stage before, and even this year against Alabama on the road in a matchup game. The other hadn't. And you saw, like, really egregious mistakes from Texas offensively. Like, for instance, on the corner blitz where Ewers is sacked and strip fumble and it leads to the 7-0 score, wide receiver never adjusts his route at all. Nobody pays attention that the corner is blitzing. He did a good job in disguise, there's no doubt, but there's nobody paying attention. Ewers' eyes aren't over there. On the pick that created the 17-0, when he throws a pick in the second quarter, it's an outside breaking route by the number 2 release. And the number 1 release, there's the sack fumble. The number 1 release runs inside of the corner. So, in the West Coast offense, and when I would sit with guys like Sean Payton, they would install a play, and the details of the play would look like this. If we're trying to throw the football on a little bit of an outside breaking route to the number 2 receiver, where it's a tight end or a slot player, then the number 1 player on the outside, the wide receiver of that side, he has to outside release, regardless, at all times. He has to get outside of that defender so that it draws that defender's eyes away from the number 2 receiver. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Sean Payton used to call it a bus ticket release. Because if you don't go outside, you're on the next bus out of town, right? And that was the whole joke, and the whole room would laugh and everything like that. But they release inside, the corner falls and intercepts the ball at 17-0. These are small details, but they're big details, and Texas made some big mistakes.
Did they panic moving off, pulling Quinn Ewers? Did Texas go, okay, the crowd, we're here. Let's go with Arch Manning? They panic a little.
I don't think he panicked, because when I was watching the film, Quinn wasn't seeing it.
That's right.
He just wasn't seeing it.
That's what I've heard people,
And, one was the corner blitz, didn't see it. The interception right there, he doesn't see that number 1 didn't go outside, and the corner falls off right into the outside breaking route. That's another age-old adage. And by the way, everyone's like, oh, well, they did a great job disguising. Yeah, fine. That's your job as a quarterback, is to uncover the disguise.
That's right.
Post-snap recognition of coverage. That is, and as a veteran, you've got to have that. He didn't understand that there was a flat defender and throws a flat route into the flat defender. That's a huge mistake. That's a rookie mistake, Colin. You can't make that as a veteran player. And then in the subsequent series, he had guys open, and you could tell his eyes were down. And that's when I could tell, like, oh, yeah, Sark knows he's not seeing it. Sark knows. It's like, this ain't happening. So whether he was trying to pull him and let Arch go the distance or just get him to settle down and see it a lot better, whatever happened at halftime, he did play much better in the third quarter.
Okay. I guess we have to address USC.
So I was waiting. I was honestly wondering, I was like, is he going to bring USC up? 3 straight losses.
You are a parent, and J-Mac's a parent. Ryan's not, I am. But when you're a parent, you have optimism. I always say, my kid's going to be president. Okay, president of a frat, hopefully employed. You go through stages of what's real and what's not.
Stages of real.
Okay.
So
with USC, Lincoln Riley offensively, and LSU, and they lost. Okay, now it's Maryland. Now it's Minnesota. Now they're losing to average teams, and they're losing the same way. And this is the criticism that I didn't want to hear. I didn't want to hear my kid couldn't be president of a Jiffy Lube. So I didn't want to hear this. People would say, Lincoln Riley never built a program. He's a finesse guy. And I watch Kirby Smart bark. I seen Sark bark. I see Ryan Day bark, Harbaugh bark. And you watch it and you're
Dan Lanning.
And I watch USC late in games. They're pretty, but they don't have a lot of bite to them. And all the criticism that I push back on, it's all coming full force to my face, and I'm like, they've led every darn game.
I would agree with that, except for we have a long history of him being a head coach. And this wasn't the MO at Oklahoma. I think that's fair. Now, what he hasn't recreated at USC that he had at Oklahoma was the ability to run the football with a really good offensive line. They kind of had it that first year with Caleb Williams and Travis Dye.
But it feels like it was a lot more Caleb and Travis than O-line.
That's exactly right. And there were a couple of those offensive lines at Oklahoma when he was there and he was the head coach that won the Joe Moore Award, best offensive line in the country, and another one finished second in the Joe Moore Award. So, they were very good up front, NFL players up front. That's what he has not been able to replicate at USC. So everything comes down to a line of scrimmage issue. Now, I'm glad you brought USC up because I actually think it's a fascinating case study. I've believed for a long time, and this is because coaches that I really respect, both that are still coaching and are not still coaching, have talked about this equation and the process of becoming elite. And generally what happens when you take over a program and you have to rebuild that program, if you have to establish something that is new, at least for the period, whether they've had it in their history or not is irrelevant.
Like the Harbaugh at Michigan.
Like Harbaugh at Michigan.
Brian Kelly at Notre Dame.
That's exactly right. So in that process, you're probably going to have at least a section of time where you might lose big. And you're going to do that before you can lose small. And that's growth, right? You're not out of the hole, but there is growth. And then you go from losing small to winning small. And then you go from winning small to winning big.
Yeah.
Pete Carroll did this exact process. Yeah. Everybody goes through this process.
Pete didn't have the transfer portal.
No, he didn't. So this is a new era, and we want it faster now than we used to in the past. Okay, so all I'm going to say is in this equation, the hardest hurdle to get over is not losing big to losing small or winning small to winning big. It's going from losing small to winning small. You have to get over that hurdle, and a lot of times that's a mental block. Are we going to make the play? Is this going to happen for us? Now, you can certainly disparage what's going on the offensive line, but it's also an offensive line that is very young. So all I'm going to say is that this team, and I've told you this last week, and I dug more into it because it was kind of top ahead last week, but this team reminds me a lot of the 2022 Texas Longhorns. That team was 2-5 in one-score games and really struggled in big moments. That didn't mean that they weren't quality in some areas. They had Bijan Robinson, this young quarterback, and Quinn Ewers, and all these redshirt freshmen on their offensive line that are now still playing.
That's USC.
You can look back to 2022 Texas as a wildly disappointing year for Steve Sarkisian, and I believe it was his second year. Wildly disappointing, and people being like, well, is this going to work or not? Or are we still on the hamster wheel? And you can look back with the benefit of hindsight and say, no, that was the bottom. And then from there, the trajectory was up.
All right.
I think, now, this may not come to fruition. I think that we could be looking back at this moment in time in Lincoln Riley's tenure as the USC head coach as the bottom. Because at some point, you're going to tip over and win games. You look at the rest of their schedule, they could very easily not only be in, but win those games.
Yes.
And as soon as they learn how to do that, Colin, then it becomes something that is a habit. Now, what is Lincoln Riley's most important job from this point to next season?
What is it?
Retaining the offensive roster.
Right.
They could have 9 starters back next year, including all that offensive line.
Every single good receiver.
All the good receivers.
5
That's exactly right. So in this day and age, his main job, yeah, you got to recruit. And yes, you're going to have to get in the transfer portal and fix what will be a defense that's losing a lot of veteran players. But his most important job is recruiting his own players, in particular on the offensive side. If he does that, I do believe that we could be looking at this as more of a low point and kind of a springboard point for his tenure at USC. One other point on this, and I'm going to bring in a couple of other teams. Very different than two other great brands that are also struggling currently, Michigan and Oklahoma. In those two places, it could get the rest of this year and even in the offseason much worse.
Right.
Based on their upcoming schedule and what they're going to have to do in order to fix what is clearly not going well, whether it's coaching staff or on their rosters, respectively. So USC could be in a position where this is the bottom.
Okay. So I did I like to call it a comedy bit. Fake ID of college football. And I said Colorado.
Yeah, you did.
Okay. First of all, audience loves our comedy bits. The problem sometimes is people take them seriously. And
it's almost like you gave them seriously. Well, without the hint of sarcasm that a normal comedy bit would then entail.
So what's happened since we did the comedy bit is that they did find a run game. And Colorado has fixed some of their defensive line issues.
Some?
And they look like a real team. I had a roving reporter friend at the Arizona game, and he said, yeah, Shadur's, this guy played college football. He goes, he's easily the best quarterback in college football. Like, that's a #1 pick. And he's like, you know, they're good.
Yeah, and they didn't even really have Travis last weekend and throttled Arizona. And listen, you have to understand, and coming from a Colorado alum, Arizona was decimated by injuries.
Yes.
Okay, so Colorado was going to go win the game, but they dominated the game. And I think that's what you're talking about. They dominated UCF. They're in the game with a lead in the last 3 minutes against Kansas State, who we all know is a very physical, tough, sound football team and clearly a top 25 team. And you're right to bring up the defense, because the biggest change this year as opposed to last year is the fact that their defense is actually real.
Yeah.
Shadur does not have to put a cape on. And he didn't have to on Saturday. Yeah. The defense is fantastic. They've got a young coordinator. His name's Rob Livingston, and Rob came as the secondary coach for the Bengals last year. Wasn't even calling defense. You know what that vein is? You know what other guys that were just hired after not being, play callers at the NFL level, guys like Ryan Day. That's when Urban Meyer hired Ryan Day. He was a quarterback coach for Chip Kelly at the 49ers. Joe Brady was a Saints offensive assistant before Ed Ogeron hired him as the offensive play caller before the Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase year. You've got that. You've got these examples where guys come in from the NFL not being OCs, and they come in and really reshape a side of the football, and that's exactly what Livingston has done at Colorado. He's done a marvelous job. And by the way, you know the best unit on that defense? The defensive line.
Yeah.
You know who their coach is? Warren Sapp.
That's
and everyone like rolled their eyes and like, oh, Deion's bringing in Warren Sapp. Those guys can play.
Yeah.
And they play really hard.
Yeah.
And that's a real team.
Yeah. And I'll say it again. Shadur Sanders, people I trust, see every snap, sit, stand. You get
great player. He's a great player.
He's a really, really special player. Yep. So this is the thing about Ohio State. We're nitpicking because I do think they're going to play for the national championship, and we're nitpicking. But for years, I'm like, they don't run the football like the Buckeyes, and I was honest. And Ryan Day goes, we don't. So they go get Chip Kelly, and you watch them against Oregon. You're like, they're not playing defense like the Buckeyes. Is it a fair criticism? You're doing Ohio State against Nebraska, so they'll win that game, I think. It could be handily. Nebraska didn't play well last weekend. But here's my thing. It kind of feels whack-a-mole. All right, we solved that one. Okay, we got to solve that one. Am I being cynical? It feels like,
no,
okay, now we
I don't think that you are. I would disagree. I think that there's one issue that keeps coming up.
Okay, what's that?
And that is their lack of pass rush allows the opposition to create explosive plays. So their defense has been the issue over the last few years.
They have that Sawyer kid. They got Jack Sawyer.
They've got Jack Sawyer. They've got JT Tuimoloau.
Yeah.
They've got some good pass rushers.
Those are good players.
But they didn't get to the quarterback at all. Dillon Gabriel was allowed to just kind of stand there with time. And all those explosive plays down the field were either the second read or double moves. You know, and so as a corner, you got to think to yourself, like, I need some help here. You got to get to the passer and affect the passer so that I don't have to cover all day long. Their inability to get to the quarterback in big games is now staggeringly consistent.
For about 3 years.
Yes. They didn't get sacks against Michigan after the Chase Young years.
When Chase left.
They did not get any pressure on Mac Jones in the national championship game in the COVID year. They haven't gotten any pressure on Michigan in any of these losses. They didn't get pressure on Oregon when they lost to Oregon at home in the shoe. They didn't get any pressure on Georgia. You look at all these matchup games, they've got like, I think it's like 3 or 4 total sacks in all of these games. And that's what has to change. So when I'm looking at this Ohio State team, to me, it's the same issue that now is continuing to come up in these big moments. And that's what allows the opposition to create the explosive plays. I don't actually think it's a secondary issue. And we're starting to get down to like, what is the issue? The pass rush. They do not get after the quarterback in big games, and they need to. And
by the way, Sawyer's probably a late first-round pick, so they're good players.
Probably so. Tui Moloau is probably the same. But I think that their issue defensively up front on the defensive line is snaps. So for instance,
if you don't run the ball consistently, you're on the field too much as a defense.
Yeah, but it's not even about that. It's more about depth and rotation. So like last year, for instance, Michigan was the best defense in college football. None of their defensive linemen played on average over 30 snaps per game.
Wow.
None of them, because they would rotate and they were deep and they were good enough and confident enough to do that. None of them. Okay, Mason Graham played the most snaps per game of any defensive lineman that Michigan had.
So Buckeyes playing too many snaps.
And against Oregon, every one of their starting defensive linemen played over 60 snaps.
Oh, that's way too many.
So if you're in the fourth quarter and you're trying to pass rush and you're not getting creativity out of the scheme, like that can be an issue. And so that to me is what the biggest issue for Ohio State is moving forward.
All right, let's circle back. This will be known as a controversial topic, and I go headlong into those. And I'm going to pull you with me. Let's go. Georgia, Texas, controversial pass interference.
Oh, yeah, the call.
And then Texas fans are throwing junk on the field. They reverse the call. Kirby Smart says, whoa, you're setting a precedent.
Yeah, you are.
Guy throws a water bottle on the field. Oh, I feel threatened. I'm going to reverse the call. Where'd you land on this?
I totally agree with Kirby Smart. Completely agree. You talked about parenting earlier in our little segment about how, hey, I want my kid to be president, but you know what else I want my kid to do? Not throw a fit on the grocery store floor for a candy at the checkout aisle. And guess what I'm not going to do? Appease my kid when he throws a fit on the floor because he wants a Snickers. I'm not going to do that. So why? Why am I not going to do that? Because he's going to throw a fit every time I go to the grocery store in the checkout aisle. So you just rewarded the precedent that those officials set on Saturday night is egregiously bad. Because now, not even just at Texas or in college football, but across football, across sports, you just showed an example of humans being able to affect the game through poor behavior. Why on earth? Now, was it a good call to begin with? No. I don't think it was a good call.
Neither did I.
And you can't say like, well, we just wanted to get it right. No, that's not the point. You set a precedent that was egregiously bad. I will say, just real quickly, an idea that I think not only the college football, but maybe all levels of football should adopt. The way forward to prevent a situation like Saturday is the UFL Super Challenge, that every coach can challenge anything on the field one time a game. Steve Sarkisian has a red flag, and he can throw it out there, and he says, I don't think that was a defensive pass interference.
Here's the thing. Here's why the officiating, the call, in my opinion, was the wrong call. But it wasn't egregiously bad, like I fell on the football and they awarded it to you. It was just it was a call that I didn't like.
It's because it's still an objective call, not a subjective call.
That's right. So because right? My take on this, right? No, it's the opposite. So it was a subjective call. I didn't like the call, but it's like you could call pass interference 34 times a game.
Yeah, it's not a score. It's not a line to gain. It's not a foot in. It wasn't a ball being fumbled,
and I land on it, and they give it to you. So I'm not going to overturn a subjective call.
Well, that's exactly right. Well, that's why you need the super challenge. Because if it's not challengeable, then now all you're doing is rewarding the fans for stopping the game so they could look at the Jumbotron and then like if that game just goes on, there's the next snap and we just move forward. But because the fans stopped the game, they got to look at the Jumbotron and have a nice little conference.
If you watch the play again, I don't love the call, but it's not worth what the officials created.
I could not agree more. I could not agree more.
I don't like the call.
By the way, I didn't like the offensive pass interference against Ohio State in the Oregon game. But that's
go either way, call.
I think it probably could.
Yes.
But again, this is why, by the way, it happened in the Tennessee-Alabama game. Late in that game, now there were several calls missed in that game, but late in that game, Alabama's on offense, and they basically give up a sack because Tennessee was offside. Yeah. It wasn't called. I want an opportunity where there's a super challenge. If there's a super challenge in college football, the fans know that it's on Sark, not them, to throw things on the field. It's on him to throw a flag out there and say, guys, you got to revisit that call. Get together, everybody discuss it, watch it again on video, and come up with a better call. At that point, we can move forward. But right now, the precedent that they set, I think that those officials on Saturday night in Austin, Texas, set back officiating writ large decades. And that's, to me, unfortunate.
Yeah. If I was head of officials, I'd fire guys in-game.
In-game?
Yeah. Be like, listen, we only got 2 guys left, but you guys learned a lesson.
And by the way, this $250,000 fine for Texas, if they would have come back and won that, that's like a quarter of the Sark GPA bonus. Like, who cares? $250,000, that sounds like a lot of money, and I'm not trying to minimize it. But to Texas, they're getting $45-50 million in revenue share from the conference. You're going to fine them $250,000? It's good seeing you, Klatt. We
would solve not only college football issues, global issues. If
probably.
We could just sit down at the table with some of those knuckleheads. The
PayPal. And especially if we had your kids here, because apparently they're president material.
Of Jiffy Lube.
Hi, everybody. It's me, Uncle Colin. Subscribe here to get the latest from the herd, including exclusive behind-the-scenes videos and more, wherever you may be, however you may be watching. Thanks again for making us part of your day.